their set spots. Like Dovi's always there, Oren's always right there. You know, and Akiva. I always know where Akiva is. Harold was always right here.
Snacking.
Harold is in the perfect spot.
Okay.
You're left out.
Rolling.
You know that's not true.
Okay, here we go.
You know that's not true.
It's a very serious topic. Just to rehash how we got to the point of discussing this. This talk tonight might have been more appropriate as a sikha. See, when you give something, in the policy decision, when you're deciding, when you're Rav Khan or Rav Wolicki, and you're deciding what to give as a sikha, you realize that the stuff you want to force everyone to hear, you can give as a sikha, because there's no choice in the matter. Everyone's there. But that I just say sort of tongue in cheek. More seriously, this is much more like a sikha because it really deals with a machshava type of issue, a hashkafa type of issue, how to view a very important issue in the world. It's the kind of things that we do in sikhot. It's certainly the kind of thing that I do in my sikhot. I've never attended one of Rav Khan's sikhot, so I'm not quite sure what goes on there. I just know that they're long. But seriously, on Sunday morning, I just want to rehash what happened at breakfast Sunday morning, because I haven't stopped thinking about it all week. Who was there Sunday morning at breakfast?
I went to breakfast.
You'd remember what I'm talking about if you were there. You know what I'm talking about, the conversation we had after breakfast. On Sunday morning, I asked a few people who had been to the event on Friday morning, the event at the Israel Center. I'd asked some people about it, and I was especially interested in it because I was part of a committee that was involved in planning it, and I was interested in hearing how it went and what happened. And when I was told about the content of a talk that was given on a topic that was chosen because of its great importance for people who are going, especially people who are going into the secular world, who are going to be having much more intense interactions with non-Jews and non-religious Jews than they've had before. So the topic of the specialness, the difference, the uniqueness of being a Jew and Jewish people, which causes a lot of existential and philosophical difficulty for people when they're interacting with non-Jews. Why am I different? Why should I be treating people different? Why should I be doing things that are different? Why am I obligated to love Jews but I'm not obligated to love non-Jews? Why all these standards where like these standards of morality that apply only to my interactions with Jews and not to other people? When I asked how it was dealt with, I was not pleased with the way it was dealt with. I'm going to sum up, I wasn't at the talk, but it's an old way of dealing with this issue, and it has a certain satisfactory quality to it. So I'll basically give that approach to the issue, and then I'll explain why it's insufficient. And then from there, we'll move on to an in-depth approach to the whole relationship of the Jews to the non-Jews, purpose of Jews. You could title this talk, "Why Did God Make Jews?" What the purpose of Jews and what we are, and hopefully it'll also along the way we'll deal with a lot of issues, real life issues that come up when you're living in a non-Jewish environment. So here's basically the 2-minute version of what was said. The mitzvot in the Torah and the rules about Judaism that have Jews treating Jews differently than they treat non-Jews are based in the idea that Jews have a different relationship to Jews. We're all mishpacha, and you treat mishpacha differently than you treat other people. So, for instance, the fact that there's a halacha that you don't have to return a lost object to a non-Jew, but you have to return it to a Jew, it's not based on the fact that there's anything wrong with non-Jews. It's based on the fact that Jews are special, and really, morally, you don't have to return any lost object to anybody. But there's a special level of morality you have to return it to. You have to return it to Jews. A way I once heard this put by a Rav who I once heard a talk by, and at the time I thought this was wonderful. It really appealed to me. But upon thinking about it for years, it occurred to me that it was insufficient. The way I once heard it put was as follows. Let's say it's a stormy night. It's a stormy winter night. And there's a knock on your door at 11 o'clock at night. And you open the door, and there's a person there in tattered clothing. And he's cold, and he's got a backpack. And he goes, "Hey man, I'm really sorry for ringing your doorbell. It's the middle of a blizzard. It's late at night. I'm sorry, but I just lost. I was evicted from my home today, and it's a really rough day to be evicted from your home. I have nowhere to sleep tonight. I'm really in a tight spot. Could you help me out?" And let's say I then reached into my wallet and pulled out a $20 bill and handed it to him. Is that considered nice behavior?
No.
Yeah, why not? It's a stranger on the street. Like, come on, let's be realistic. You're in Cleveland.
Yeah.
A stranger, he comes to your door. You don't know what he is. I give him $20. Let's say I give him $100. Give him $100.
That
He can go get a motel room. He can go to a condo lodge. He can get right.
Walk.
Okay,
That's fine.
I'm a pretty nice guy, right? Let's put it this way: even if you were to rate it morally, even if you think I should have invited him in, I'm not a 0.
You're
I'm doing pretty well. Okay.
1 man.
Okay. And I send him on his way.
You're probably about a 7 on the
Okay.
There are no hotels.
I really don't want this to be a dialogue, or we'll be here all night. Okay. Let's please restrict the comments to things where you either really disagree with me, or you don't understand something I said. Because otherwise, it'll take forever. I send the person on their way. 15 minutes later, there's another knock on my door. I go to the door, I open the door, and it's my mom. And my mom's got a backpack on, and she goes, "Oh, hi, son, I'm in a really bad way. I just got evicted from my home, and I have nowhere to sleep tonight, and I don't know what to do. Maybe you can help me." And I pull out another $100 bill, and I hand it to her. And I send her on her way. Okay? Now I'm the biggest jerk on earth. Okay, 15 minutes ago, I was a really good guy who was helping out. So that's the thumbnail sketch of this approach, which is you treat mishpacha differently than you treat other people. The problem with that approach, the reason it's not satisfying, is it doesn't answer the question why. All it does is restate, in a more emotionally satisfying way, the fact that we treat Jews differently than non-Jews. It doesn't really help address the question, which is, well, why do we really? Why shouldn't I have the same standard of morality for non-Jewish people? Why do... It doesn't fully answer the question. Why is there this mishpacha relationship to other Jews? How about that question? Forget asking about why am I treating non-Jews badly. Why do I have to treat... If it's not really a moral thing, you're supposed to treat Jews as mishpacha, why do I have to? So I find this whole approach somewhat unsatisfying, and I think it loses the big picture. Okay. The way we're going to do this is, Rav Kook actually wrote an essay on this topic, on the topic of the relationship of the Jewish people as a whole and Jews individually to the non-Jewish world. It's about, I think it's 10 or 12 pages long. Now, if any of you have ever learned Rav Kook with me, let's say on a Tuesday night when we do Enaya, we do maybe one column and it takes 45 minutes. So if you can just imagine what it would take us to learn through together a 10-page essay of Rav Kook, it would be like a 6-part series. We're not going to do that. But on the other hand, this is an essay that I really want to be able to give over. So what I did instead was I went through it. I've read this essay many times, and I went through it again tonight, and I basically made like a point-by-point summary of this essay, leaving out a lot of other stuff, but basically getting to the gist of it. And I'm just going to say it to you. So what I'm going to say to you now is this is just straight the word. This is basically the ideas of Rav Kook. Rav Kook, it's a beautiful essay. Rav Kook starts the essay. Rav Kook never states his thesis. He just starts talking. Okay, so Rav Kook starts talking about the fact that Yaakov's name was changed from Yaakov to Yisrael. And the Torah says when Yaakov's name was changed to Yaakov to Yisrael, Hashem says, Lo yikarei shimcha od Yaakov ki Yisrael. You're never going to be called Yaakov again, you're only going to be called Yisrael. And what's wrong with that is, if he does get called Yaakov again. Rav Kook then brings up the fact that Avram also has a name change. And by Avram, God also says your name is not Avram anymore, it's going to be Avraham. And there, his name actually is never Avram again, it's always Avraham from there forward. So he asks, Rav Kook asks, what's the difference? Why is this name change isn't permanent and this one is, even though God says that both of them are permanent? Question number one. Question number two, if we want to deepen this question, Rav Kook says that the Gemara actually says that anyone who calls Avraham, violates the Torah commandment. Like it's like a terrible thing to call Avraham Avram. But there's no such negative about calling Yisrael Yaakov, Yaakov Yisrael, whatever it is. And in fact, the Torah, calls him Yaakov again. So why is it such a terrible thing to call Avram Avram? To top it off, Rav Kook says, and I'm leaving out a couple points he makes here, but to top it off, Rav Kook asks the following question. He says, he quotes the Gemara. Now, what do these four names mean? Avram, Avraham, Yaakov, and Yisrael. What do these four names mean? The name Avram is a compound word of Av, Aram, Avla Aram. Okay, it implies that Avram Avinu was a leader, an Av, of the place called Aram, which is where he was from. Avram. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. Avraham, Avla Aram. The name Avraham, there you don't need the Gemara. There the Pasuk says what it means. Ki Av Hamon Goyim Netatich. God says, I'm calling you, when God changes his name to Avraham, he says, the reason I'm changing your name to Avraham is that I'm making you into an Av, a leader of Hamon Goyim, of many, of the multitude of nations. Okay? So the name Avram means leader of Aram, leader of that people. Avraham means leader of everybody. Okay, those are those two names. Yaakov and Yisrael. Now, what does the name Yaakov mean? Something to do with following or holding on to the heel, right? That's why he's called Yaakov in the Pasuk. And Yisrael, what does the Malach say when he names him Yisrael? Kisarita im Elohim b'anoshim v'tuchal. Because you are a master, you are a leader of God and man. Okay. So Rav Kook says, the name Yaakov has a negative connotation. The only one of the four names here that has a negative connotation. Holding on to Esav's heel. Okay, it implies some sort of secondary or not a very positive status. Avram, leader of Aram, very nice name. Avraham, leader of many nations, beautiful name. He says, if any of these names should have been eliminated permanently, which one should it be? Yaakov. Of all the four names to be eliminated permanently, it should be Yaakov. Why, of all things, are you not allowed to call Avraham Avram? So Rav Kook goes on to explain as follows. He says, before Avram Avinu had any mitzvot, he was just the most moral and most ethical non-Jew, there were no Jews yet, in the world. Okay? He was the most ethical non-Jewish person in the world. Now, this ethics, human ethical behavior, which is agreed upon by all men. You're not supposed to kill, you're not supposed to steal. There's certain human ethics, and those ethics change slightly with time. But basically, there's a human ethical system that a wise, ethical person will arrive at just with their seichel and by being a moral, ethical person. Human ethics are based on human seichel. This is the mitzvot in the Torah. The vast majority of the time, Cook here says always, even though in other places he talks about how it's the majority of the time. The majority of the time, mitzvot agree with regular human ethical behaviors, right? Most mitzvot, if you were to take a non-Jew living totally ethically according to his own rational logic, he's a very ethical non-Jew. You go out into the world, you will meet, Baruch Hashem, many wonderful ethical non-Jews. You meet these people, they're living basically ethical lives. A person who's following the Shulchan Aruch, who's living according to Torah, a lot of the things that he believes in terms of behavior, are going to be the same. But, says Rav Kook, there's a difference that they believe that they're ethical for different reasons. The ethical person who's ethical as a humanist ethical person believes there's all sorts of logic and rationale for why he's an ethical person. And the person who's ethical religiously believes that God told him to behave this way. Okay, that's a distinction. So externally, a lot of their behaviors are going to be the same in terms of ethics. Now, one more difficult, abstract idea, and then things are going to start, I think, becoming much clearer. Among the ethical things that people believe are ethically true, don't worry, this is all going to come together to be very practical about our lives. Among the things that people believe to be ethically true, one of them is that it's pretty much agreed upon among most nations of the world that being a patriotic person to whatever nation you're from is a positive trait. It's kind of a heroic trait. If you were, say, visiting some country, or you're touring Europe and you go to some country and you saw some monument to heroes of war who gave their lives for the country, those are heroes here locally. They're heroes to these people. They're great people. They're not my great people, but they're great people. Being patriotic is viewed as a positive trait. Caring about your nation is viewed as a positive trait. Great philosophers and thinkers have written, Cook says, about how this is a positive trait. On the other hand, everyone agrees, every normal ethical person on earth views being a selfish person as a negative trait. Right? We all know selfish people, we have selfish moments. It's a negative trait. It's viewed as a bad, unethical trait. Says, what's the problem? Says, the problem is that if you think about it, being patriotic to your nation is just a very grandiose form of selfishness. Why? Because for the same reason that selfishness is wrong, which is, why should your interests be more important than someone else's? That's why selfishness is wrong. Patriotism is wrong, ethically. Why should the needs of your nation be more important than the needs of the other nation? Right? Why? Why should aggrandizing your nation at the expense of some other nation be a positive thing? Now, it could be that there's some moral reason why you're fighting them, but that's a different story. But patriotism in itself, my nation should be successful, is itself it's a higher form, but nevertheless a form of selfishness. Okay? Now, God comes to Avram Avinu, and he gives him a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah he gives him? When he changes his name, when does God change his name to Abraham? He changes it at the same time as he gives him the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Now Avram Avinu actually has a mitzvah. He's no longer going to be doing things that are ethically according to human rationale. He's now going to start doing things that God told him to do, even though they seem kind of weird and possibly even unethical. He's going to start doing things that God tells him to do. Now, he's going to separate himself by doing these things. There's a famous medrash that some of you might have heard that Avram Avinu went to ask his friends whether he should do the Brit Milah. You ever hear that medrash? Interesting medrash. Avram Avinu went, he had 3 friends, Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre. He asked them what they thought. One of them, Mamre, said to go ahead and do it. Aner and Eshkol gave reasons why he shouldn't do it. One of the reasons that was given to him was, you're going to be different than everyone else. Right? Avram Avinu is about, by doing mitzvot, and this doesn't just apply to Avram, start listening carefully, this applies to all of us. By doing mitzvot, Avram's about to separate himself from everyone. Right? By being told to go to the land of Israel earlier, he was told to go to another place, to a specific land. So God's basically, this is what Rav Kook says. Listen, this is, if all you hear tonight is this word, it's worthless. God says to Avram Avinu, I'm about to make you be separate than everyone else. If you dare think that the reason I'm making you separate from everyone else is to produce a nation that's going to be nationalistic and patriotic to itself and care about itself separately from everyone else, lest you think that that's the purpose of this, at the same time as I cause you to separate yourself from everyone else, I'm going to change your name to a very universalistic name. Av Hamon Goyim. Avram Avinu. I am separating you from everyone else by giving you a Brit Milah, but it's not to be separate and patriotic and nationalistic about your own people. No. I'm separating you in order to fulfill a purpose of leading the whole world, of seeking the benefit of all of humanity. You're going to be separate, but being separate is going to allow you to be Av Hamon Goyim. There's a pasuk in Devarim talks about fulfilling the mitzvot in the Torah, and it says, "Ki hi chochmatchem ubinatchem," because doing the Torah is your wisdom and your understanding. Le'enei ha'amim, in the eyes of the nations. Asher yiru v'asher yishmu, who will see and hear. V'yomru, and they'll say, "Rak am chacham v'navon hagoy hagadol hazeh." This nation is wise and understanding. Listen to that pasuk. The pasuk in the Chumash says, this is your wisdom and understanding. The nations of the world are going to see, and they're going to say, wow, what an awesome nation. What a brilliant nation. Rav Kook says, he quotes the pasuk and he says, why do we care? Why is this a motivation to do mitzvah? This should be a motivation to do mitzvot, to get kavod from the nations of the world for doing mitzvot. For them to go, ooh, ah, cool. These Jews are really great. That's why we're doing mitzvot? So he says that's not what it means. So Rav Kook, I'm going to start reading this, pass them around. I'm reading the quote on the left. On the right, from Midbar Shur. Quote in parentheses. Listen to what Rav Kook says here. I photocopied it because this is one of the most beautiful pieces of writing I've ever seen in my life. Aval hakavana basipur inyan zeh is the intention in telling this over. The piece on the right. He says the intention in saying this pasuk, that the nations of the world, what are we saying? We care that the nation. Now remember where we are. We just said there's a pasuk in the Torah that says that the reason to do mitzvot is that the nations of the world are going to see how brilliant we are. So what does that mean? So says Rav Kook, the intention of saying this is ech she'al yedei shmirat haTorah yasigu hatachlita amitit. What it's telling us is that by keeping the Torah we will achieve the true purpose, hanichsefet, that is desired. V'hila asot ritzon Hashem yibarach ba'ashlamat hamin enoshi, and that is to do the will of Hashem by completing the entire human species, bringing completeness to the entire humanity. Ki ha'amim yakiru al yedei zeh kvodan shel Yisrael, because the nations of the world will recognize the honor of the Jewish people. V'yomru, and they'll say, Rak am chacham v'navon hagoy gadol hazeh. A great and wise, a wise and understanding nation is this great people. V'al yedei zeh yitratzu lalechet bor Hashem v'yishtalmu karoi, and through this they will want to go in the light of God, and they will be completed appropriately. They will be perfected. And God's desire will be successful through our hands. Al kain, therefore, therefore, when we are considered a unique people and separated from all other nations because of the Torah, think of Avram getting the Brit Milah, separating himself. By separating ourselves through the Torah, davar zehu emet v'kayam u'mechuvan ma'od letachlit chayfetz Hashem yitbarach b'olamo. This separating of us, our separating ourselves through the Torah, is truly emet v'kayam. It is true and established and intended very much for the purpose of God's desire in the world. Ki efshar klal sheishtalem haolam ki im biyot Yisrael umdim b'ma'alatam hanivdelet. Because it is impossible for the world to be perfected unless the Jewish people are in their lofty, separated place. Mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. A kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I'll get to that phrase in a few more minutes. We'll talk about it some more. Below ta'aruvotim darchei amim, without mixing in with the ways of the nations. Below nitiyah la ruach hasorer al pi hadrachim shel hasechel anoshi hativi, and not tending towards the spirit that governs the ways of of human natural intellect. That's not why we're moral. Ha'arum me'adrachat hanevuah, which is naked from the direction of prophecy, v'hayashara elokit, and the godly direction. In Cain, therefore, listen to this phrase: Otar ha'hitpardut mikol ha'amim, hi atzma ha'hitachdut hayoter atzuma. The very separation from the nations is actually the most powerful connection to those nations. Leho'il l'chol ha'adam asher al pnei ha'adama, to provide for the purpose of all people on the face of the earth. Let me explain what Rav Kook just said. If you've lost me, get back in. Phil, wake up. Listen to me. What Rav Kook is saying here is very powerful. He says, God's desire, Rav Kook quotes the pasuk, V'rachamav al kol ma'asav. God has mercy on all of His creations. God wants the perfection of humanity. The Torah doesn't begin with the birth of Avraham Avinu. It starts with Adam. The Mabul story tells us how we got to this point. The goal is to perfect the world. In order to perfect the world, God needs people, a group of people in the world who will, through them, the world will be exposed to a morality, to a higher purpose that will change the world and eventually bring it around to God's purpose. in order for those people to have that higher morality and to develop it so that they can fulfill that mission, they need to separate themselves from the world. They need it. And if they don't separate themselves from the world, they're never going to be able to achieve that higher status. So what seems this withdrawal from the world is a withdrawal in order to prepare to serve a much greater purpose, which is the perfection of that very world that they're withdrawing from. All encapsulated in that one idea, that when God tells Avram Avinu to do the Brit Milah, separating himself from the world, at that point he tells him, your name is now Av Hamon Goyim. Lest you think that you're being separated for the purpose of being separate, no, you're being separated in order to lead the whole world.
So why are we saying the idea of missionaries?
Wait. Ask questions at the end. I don't know what missionaries has to do with it. Missionaries are people trying to draw us away from Judaism.
No, I'm saying why are we so? Jewish missionaries.
No. We'll get to that. Why doesn't everyone have to be Jewish? You mean? Like why don't we
try?
No. I'll get to that. Don't worry. We'll address that. We will address that directly. It's right here on my list. Right there. Okay. Now. This is why, if one, the Gemara says, if one calls Avraham Avram, it's a violation. Because to say that being separate is about some sort of local nationalism. Avram means nationalism on a small scale. I care about my people. Av la'aram. If you think that Abraham, after getting mitzvot from Hashem, is supposed to serve his own private national purpose, it's terrible. You totally misunderstand. There are many, many Jews, Shomrei Torah mitzvahs, who think that the goal of Jewish people is to completely separate themselves from the non-Jewish world. But that's only the means. That's not the purpose. That's only stage one. That's in order to affect the rest of the world. Beautiful line he said there. Ota ha'itpardut hi atzma ha'itachdut. Beautiful. The very separation is itself a connection to the world. Okay. Now, Avram Avinu has a child named Yitzchak who embodies both Avram's separateness and his involvement with the world. Yitzchak has two sons. He has Esav and Yaakov. And Esav is Ish Sadeh. He's out there in the world. Right? That's Esav. He's out there in the world. He has a natural tendency to influence others and conquer and connect and dominate. Yaakov, Ish Tam Yoshev Oliv. Yaakov has that withdrawal part of him. So these two forces, connecting and withdrawing, are embodied in two different people with Esav and Yaakov. Avram had one and then he got the other. Yitzchak was born into both. Esav and Yaakov each went in different directions. Esav took all the connection, but if you go out into the world connecting with other people and influencing them, but you don't have the separate identity that was nourished and developed by pulling away from the world, then all you do is mix in with everyone, or impose upon them values that have nothing to do with anything from God. They just have to do with whatever you feel like. So yes, you're connecting and imposing values and conquering and changing and influencing, but to what? On the other hand, if you're Yaakov Ishtam Yoshev Oalim, and you never go out into the world to connect, so you're separate and you're developing your own independent Jewish identity, that's wonderful, but what's it good for? It's not affecting anybody. So Yaakov wants the Bechora. What does Bechora mean? Bechora means the primary purpose. Right? The birthright. The primary purpose. What's the primary purpose? The primary purpose is what Esav had. Because the primary purpose isn't separating. The primary purpose is connecting. It's affecting everyone. That's the primary purpose. It's what Esav had. Yaakov wanted that. Yaakov wanted that as part of him. Yaakov connects with the Bechora, and now he's got both. When he goes off into the world, it's deals with Lavan. There's both aspects there, withdrawing and interacting. He struggles with the angel. And he gets the name Yisrael. But the name Yisrael is a name that means that you have your own unique identity and it rules. It's the full fulfillment of both. In order for that identity to be fulfilled, the world has to be ready for it. It's not enough for the person doing the influencing to be ready. The people that they're influencing also have to be ready. So until the nations of the world are ready to hear the message, Yaakov can't behave as Yisrael. And he has to be Yaakov. He has to withdraw from the world and emphasize his own identity and protect himself from the forces that are out to destroy him, which is what Yaakov is very good at, evading trouble and jumping between the raindrops and staying out of this guy's way and that guy's way and saying what he's got to say to survive, until the time comes when the world's ready to listen and he can be Yisrael and really affect the world. That's Yaakov Yisrael. And that's why Yaakov, even though his name is changed to Yisrael, its name is changed to Yisrael in a potential way. God is saying, Lo yikareh shimcha Yisrael. He means Yaakov. He means in the future your name will know. There will come a day where you won't be Yaakov anymore, where you'll be fully in that position to affect. Yaakov is called Yaakov because he holds back Esav's heel. Now, what does that mean? Yaakov is a heel. A heel steps. If someone's holding onto your heel, you can't move. You can't take a step forward. So Rav Kook explains it as follows. He says, Esav's whole approach, and Esav is Rome, and Esav is Christianity, Esav is the West. Esav's approach is to influence, is to connect, is to dominate, to bring his value system to whoever, and to assimilate everyone into one. That's what these forces in history have always done, to bring everyone under one roof. Yaakov, withdrawing from the world and refusing to be influenced by the outside world, prevents Esav from fully fulfilling what he wants to do, because he wants everyone to be the same. So Yaakov's existence holds back Esav's foot. Esav can't fully do what he wants to do in the world. So Yaakov, fulfilling the role of Yaakov, holds Esav back until the time is right when Yaakov can be Israel. That's stage one. We'll do one more piece of Torah, and then we'll start talking about life in the real world. The other piece of Torah is this little piece of Einayah that you have in front of you on this sheet. Esav wants everyone to be the same, everyone to assimilate, everyone to be dominated by his world culture. And Yaakov withdraws from the world culture. He's living in the tent, he's inside, he's building his own separate identity. So that itself doesn't allow Esav to fully dominate everyone, because he's not participating.
Well, is Esav, making everyone the same a necessary step before Yaakov, until Yaakov steps forward?
Yes. Everyone except Yaakov.
Right.
Yes.
Could a way of understanding it be that because Esav is violent, because Esav uses violence in order to...
Not always. He sometimes hugs and kisses. Look at the Psukim. Esav doesn't just... he's all kinds of means.
It's a use of domination.
It's dominant, right.
Yeah, that he has to dominate.
Right, like Western culture is dominant without being violent.
Right.
Today, and it's erasing other cultures. It's making them less and less relevant.
It's not.
But without being violent.
It's Esav's way of spreading is not necessarily the more ethical way.
It has nothing to do with ethics. Esav's way has nothing to do with ethics.
Esav's way has nothing.
That's why I said. That's what I said before. I said Esav connects and influences without it being connected to any moral system. It's just it's the connection without any fully developed value system.
And so Yaakov brings ethics into Esav's.
This is the next step. Okay? Right. Yaakov brings the ethics in. This little piece of Einayah, I'm going to say it to you outside. but you can learn it yourself. The Hebrew's not hard. This is the very first piece in all of Einaya. Volume 1, opening line of Masechet, opening line of Shas. This is what Rav Kook wrote on it. The opening line of Shas is a halacha that is worded very strangely. If you were an editor, you would have told Rabbi Yehuda Anasi to rewrite this line. It says, I think we all know this line. The opening line of the first Mishnah in Bracha. From when is the time to say Kriyat Shema at night? From the time that the Kohanim go in to eat their truma. One of the most inefficient ways of writing a halacha ever conceived of. Because the Gemara then goes off and asks the obvious question. When is that? Like, the Gemara could have said, Mei matai korin Kriyat Shema b'arvit, mitzeit ha'kochavim. From the time the Kohanim, you have to know when the Kohanim go in to eat their truma to be able to understand what the halacha is. It's a very inefficient way to write a halacha. Rav Kook takes that and he says, basically what he says is this, and some of what I'm saying he said here is reading between the lines. Trust me, I've read enough of the background information. But most of what I'm saying is exactly what he says here. Rabbi Yehuda Anasi wrote the Mishnayot. Why did he write the Mishnayot? So it won't be lost, because Klal Yisrael was heading into Galut. The opening line of Torah Shebaal Peh, when he wrote it down, said, what's the appropriate time for reading Shema at night? Says Rav Kook, there's two. What is saying Shema? Saying Shema is accepting upon yourself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. The Jewish people have two yokes of the kingdom of heaven that we carry. One of them is called Shema at night, and one of them is called Shema during the day. We have two connections to God, two roles in the world that we play. And those two roles are, number one, Mamlechet Kohanim, that we're a kingdom of Kohanim. Kohanim are priests. Kingdom of priests. What's the role of a priest in the world? No! The role of a priest! You never heard of a priest?
Sanctify the sanctified.
Good! A priest is a religious leader, thank you. Is that what you said? Good, okay. I didn't hear what you said. I thought you said to sit in the Beit Midrash or something like that. Is that what you said? No. I mean a priest. What's the role of a priest? A priest, good. A priest is supposed to inspire people religiously. He's supposed to affect the world religiously. Great. Now, can you imagine if you had a whole kingdom of priests? Who's making the hamburgers? You know, who's washing the windows? Like, whatever it is. Like, so a kingdom. So what does it mean, a kingdom of priests? What is it? If we're all supposed to be Kohanim, who are we the Kohanim for? For each other? For the world. We're the Kohanim of the world. We're supposed to be. And what is a Kohen? We all know what a Kohen does. A Kohen has a different set of rules. He has a higher level of holiness, a higher holiness standard that he's held to. But why? For himself? No, in order to inspire us. We are an entire nation that's supposed to play that role for the world. We're a Mamlechet Kohanim. That's one role. But we have another role also, which is Goy Kadosh, the other half of the phrase. Kadosh means separate. We're a separate nation. These two jobs are at odds with each other. How can I be out there influencing the world if I'm also supposed to be totally separate from it? These are two opposing jobs. Mamlechet Kohanim on the one hand, influencing. Goy Kadosh on the other hand, totally separate from everyone. How do I do both? Rav Kook says, depends what's going on in the world. If it's a time of day, it's a time when things are bright, when people can see. It's good times, people are willing to listen, the world is open to truth and ideas, then we can play the role of Kriyat Shema Shel Shacharit. Where the Kohanim are out there doing, what are the Kohanim doing during the day? They're doing the Avoda. On behalf of the people. With the people. They're doing their job in the world. And what happens as nightfall comes, as times get dark, as times get bad? As the sun starts to set, what do the Kohanim do? They go inside, secluding themselves, to eat their truma. Interesting halacha about truma. Is a Kohen allowed to share truma with you? No. Only a Kohen can eat truma. The Kohen separates himself. When a Kohen eats truma, he is by definition separating himself from the rest of the world. So says Rav Kook, the image of Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit, the declaration of God's name that we make in dark times, when times are tough and there's pogroms and ghettos and crusaders, what are we doing? We're not out there influencing the world. There's no one's listening. You know what we're doing? We're inside eating our truma. We're trying to stay safe from the outside world, not let it influence us, and stay strong so that we can pass the baton to the next generation. So that eventually, when the sun rises and times get good and people are willing to listen, we can do the other job. And we can influence them. We are a Mamlechet Kohanim and a Goy Kadosh. And that's encapsulated. So it says Rav Kook, Rav Yehuda Anasi at the beginning of the Galus. The opening line of Masechet Brachot is, folks, we're heading for dark times. We have our role in the world as we head into Galut is to keep safe and keep our holiness safe from the outside world where it's dangerous. But gentlemen, we're not living on Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's end of the dark tunnel. We're on the other end of the tunnel. And we know that the world we live in is different. This whole theological issue of how to relate to the outside world, to non-Jews, would not exist if we lived 500 years ago. If we're in the Warsaw Ghetto hiding from the Nazis, who if they see us learning Torah are going to kill us, we're not sitting there wondering, how come I have to treat my non-Jewish roommate differently than I treat my Jewish friends? That's not part of the equation. When the non-Jewish world is hostile to us, the goal is to go in to eat our truma, because it's dark outside, it's night. But we live in a different time. The world is willing to hear what we have to say, and we do interact with them. And we have a job. From here we move into an idea that I read a long time ago. This I mentioned Sunday morning at breakfast. It's a great book called This Is My God by Herman Wouk. Herman Wouk is a famous American author. He wrote The Winds of War, he wrote Marjorie Morningstar. Famous novelist in the United States. Herman Wouk. From man, did the full Daf Yomi cycle about 3-4 times. Talmud Chacham. I once had the pleasure of learning Mishnayos with him in his home. In Palm Springs, California. Me, him, and his German Shepherd. Some Mishnah in the Luxubas somewhere we were learning. Herman Wouk wrote a book about being an Orthodox Jew. It was one of the first Kiruv books written in America. Back before Art Scroll, decades before Art Scroll, back in the 1950s sometime. Herman Wouk, in this book called This Is My God, Herman Wouk gives a very interesting analogy. He's talking there about mitzvah. And he says that being a Jew is very much like being in the army. In the army you have all kinds of rules. Yeah. Your shirt has to be tucked a certain way, and your bed has to be made a certain way, and let's take it over now to the Israeli army. In the Israeli army, you have to have rubber bands rolled up in the bottom of your pant legs, so that your pant leg comes around tight, curled in above about a centimeter above the top of your boot. You ever see Israeli soldiers with the way their pant legs come down? Because they have there's rubber bands that they roll up inside the pant leg to make it do that. You're given rubber bands. The beret, an Israeli soldier must have his beret, unless he's in some sort of official ceremony where he's supposed to have it on his head. At all other times, his beret is supposed to be in the left shoulder strap of his shirt. Not in the right one, not in his pocket. In the left shoulder strap. You can get a ticket from a military police officer if he sees him in public with his beret not in the left shoulder strap. So says Herman Wouk, he says, when you're in the army, you have all kinds of rules. I think one of his examples there of a mitzvah is not eating lobster. I think that's one of the examples he gives. He says you have all kinds of rules. And people could look at those rules and say, well, why is that rule important? Why does having your beret in the left shoulder strap make you a better soldier? Why does that make you better on the field of battle? How does that make you better able to defend the country? Before we answer that question, because I want to elaborate on that a little bit, I want to answer the question Robbie asked before. Robbie said, why don't we go out proselytizing? Trying to get more people to become Jewish. And the answer is, not everyone's supposed to be in the army. Everyone needs there to be an army. It's important that there's an army. And the army serves all of our purposes. And society is not safe unless there's an army. But there's absolutely no need for everyone to be in the army. And we're the army. God chose us for that purpose. We're supposed to be a kingdom of priests. God wanted that there aren't just religious leaders, priests, rabbis, whatever, but that there's actually an entire society. It's a different goal. Usually people's religious role models are people who are religious professionals. Like me, I'm a rabbi. But God says, no, that's not what the perfection of the world requires. Humanity seeing that religion isn't separate from life. That you can have an entire society governed by religious ideals. In order to have an entire society governed by religious ideals, you need an entire nation that is functioning at a higher level. A kingdom of priests. A priestly kingdom. Meaning, a priestly kingdom includes garbage men. It includes people running the corner store. It includes stockbrokers and lawyers and bus drivers and everybody. And you have an entire nation that is functioning at a higher moral standard and a higher ethical standard than the rest of the world, providing an example for how a society should function. That's what it means to be a kingdom of priests. Entire communities that are functioning at a higher level. The spiritual army. Now let's get to what Herman Wouk said about this issue of someone asking, why do you have to have that beret there? I'd like to really focus on this issue now, especially for those people who are going to be entering into non-Jewish environments. Listen very carefully. One of the biggest problems that people face, and I'm saying this to you, let me put all my cards on the table. I didn't go to YU. I kind of did. I went to York University, Toronto. Okay? I went to a non-Jewish college, and I didn't study what all the Jews were studying. I wasn't in the business school or studying engineering. There's always a few frum people in there. I wasn't in any of those programs. I was studying English literature. There were no Orthodox Jews in my programs, in my classes. I had a lot of friends who weren't Jewish. People I played pool with. People I had a beer with after class. People I played cards with. They were not Jews. A lot of my friends in college were not Jewish. A lot of my friends in college were not frum. I was also friends with a lot of Jews. But I had a lot of friends, and I don't mean just like friends, people I talked to in school, but I had no connection to the outside. I went out with them. I had friends who were not Jewish. And I had a lot of friends who were not observant, who were Jews but not observant. Most of my friends in those years. And one of the big issues that you face, and you don't just face it, actually in the secular colleges, every Jew faces it. You face it even in yeshiva. Phil, you even face it in yeshiva. Is the issue, I came up with a name for it this week, which is the philosophical problem of viewing mitzvot in isolation. What I mean by that is when you look at a mitzvah on its own and you try to understand its purpose. It's a very, very big problem, and it leads people to drop a lot of mitzvot. The problem is when you say, let's say, we'll use a fictional non-frum or non-Jewish friend you have, but this stuff goes on in our own minds, in ourselves as well. We ask the same questions to ourselves. Where your friend says to you, your friend says, hey, you want to go out for ice cream? You say, oh, I can't because I had a salami sandwich 2 hours ago and I have to wait 6 hours to meet milk. And your friend looks at you like you're from outer space. And then, not trying to be antagonistic or like be your little devil on the shoulder saying, commit sin, but very realistically says, why? Why is that important? You go, well, it's a law in the Torah. I'm an Orthodox Jew. We don't do this. And he says, no, I want to know why. Like, not being antagonistic, respectfully, why does that really matter to your to your spiritual life, to your relationship to God? Why does that make you a better person? Does it really matter? Can't you be just as good a person and eat a cheeseburger? Are you saying that is it immoral? So you try to come up with these Kirov answers. Oh, milk is this, meat is that. Here's the problem. This is an unwinnable battle. Because you can take almost any mitzvah, and if you ask yourself these types of questions, you can end up saying, of course you could, because frankly, guys, you're going to go into the world and you're going to meet some non-Jews who eat cheeseburgers and eat lobsters and never heard of Shabbos, and they're not Jewish, And they're very moral, very good people. They're good people. They're doing good things in the world. They care about good things. They're wonderful, moral people. A lot more moral than a lot of Jews you know. And your mind plays tricks on you, and you say to yourself, well, it's a good point. Why is it so important that I do this or that mitzvah? Does it really make me a better person? And there goes Mincha, and there goes Tzitzis, and there goes Shabbos, and it's very, very easy. You could take any mitzvah. I'm going to say it again, this is an unwinnable battle. It's not winnable. If you start asking that question about mitzvah, you lost. Because you're never going to have a good answer that's going to satisfy you. The real answer is, it's like the beret and the shoulder strap. It's the beret and the shoulder strap. Could you imagine explaining to someone how that makes you a better soldier? Well, because it's all part of the discipline. It's a very, okay, fine. It doesn't really resonate well. Come on, take the beret out, you'll be just as good a soldier. Anyone who knows about the way military dynamics work will tell you that those things are very, very important. You can't exactly put your finger on why, but they're very, very important. The correct answer to that question when someone asks it to you about waiting 6 hours, or why you can't go out on Shabbos with them, or whatever it is, or why you're wearing those funny straps in your arms, when someone asks you that question, why is that important? Does that make you a better person? However they phrase the question, the correct answer is, if you want to know why that particular thing is important, the truth is, it's a very small detail as a part of a very large system. If you want, I'll explain to you why the whole system is important. And then understand that this is only one very small detail. I can't really explain to you why this detail is so important. And if they still push you on this point, use the following analogy. You've probably heard me say this. I say it all the time. It's what I call my pointillism analogy. You have a picture that's made up of dots. You've all seen pictures like this. It's called pointillist art. The artist makes a picture out of different dots of different sizes and colors. If you were to take a magnifying glass and zero in on one dot and say, why is that dot important to the picture? The actual answer is, you could erase the dot and the picture looks identical. Look, you see, that dot wasn't actually important. And you could say it about that dot, and that dot, and that dot, and that dot, and that dot. And somewhere along the way, you're not going to be able to tell when your picture got blurry. So it's an unwinnable argument. You cannot isolate a mitzvah, ask why it's important, and come up with a satisfactory answer. And if you want to use it as an excuse to drop mitzvahs, it's the best excuse. It's the most common excuse. It is the way we drop mitzvahs. We've all done it. The way we drop mitzvahs is we rationalize why that mitzvah isn't so important. We take it out of the context of the larger system, and bingo, it has no meaning anymore. Beautiful. You can do it with every mitzvah. Pull it out, look at it. Oh yeah, you're right. I'm just as good a person if I don't do that. And you don't even notice. It's just because you have the whole moral high ground thing. What do you mean? I'm not as good a person anymore because I ate a lobster? And of course it sounds absurd like that. What? You're a better soldier than me because you got rubber bands in your socks? You're going to be able to kill enemies better? It's an unwinnable argument. So you have to look at it as part of being in the army. Now, lastly, I want to pull some of this stuff together and talk about what does this mean that we're like defending the whole world, or that we have, or the army. It's very hard to be in the army if no one knows that there's an enemy. See, it's one thing if we have a friend who goes to the army. We're all very proud of him. He's going to the army. We know he's defending us, and he's doing us a favor. He's there in the army, and he's actually very intimately connected to us. So the analogy works well, except if we imagine a situation where we don't believe there's an actual enemy, or that there's any need for an army at all. Then if our friend goes to the army, we think he's an idiot. What exactly are you defending us against? Oh, Mr. Jew, you're in the army. You're defending the whole world against some moral downfall that will befall it if you Jews don't protect us with your force field of spirituality. How does this work? Is it actually real? On the mystical level, there's a lot to say, but we're not mystics. Let's make it real. It is very, very real. It is as real as everything in Western values. What are Western values today? Every historian today will tell you that Western values are what they call Judeo-Christian values. They're the values that come from the biblical society that was developed in Europe as a result of influence of the Bible and of Judaism. That's what Western values are. You'll notice that every major threat to Western values, who do they hate most? The Jews. Who's the biggest threat to Western values today? Muslim fundamentalism. Who's their number one enemy? Who do they hate most?
Jews.
The Jews. The communists hated Western values. Who's their number one enemy? The Jews. The Nazis? The number one enemy was the Jews. Somehow all the forces that are opposed to things like freedom and equality and what we view as regular moral Western ethics, which have developed wonderfully over the last few hundred years. The world is a more ethical place today than it was a few centuries ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. The forces that try to destroy that usually hate the Jews. But it's not just about who hates us. The fact is that the way the world has gotten to this point, you can't put your finger on which Jew or which Jewish community or how the influence worked. But if Jews hadn't kept the Torah, if after the Churban Bayesheni they had just dropped the whole thing, then all this influence of Judaism on the Western world, and on Western society, and more recently on American society, would simply never have existed. There would have been no Jewish people to influence them. So this isn't some fairy tale or some mystical concept. This is very, very real. Yes, we're all very, very small players in it. We're foot soldiers. We're very, very small players in it, but that shouldn't diminish the importance of what we're doing. I want to read you an excerpt from a book review, from a book that came out about 13 years ago, called The Gifts of the Jews in the World, by Thomas Cahill. Thomas Cahill is a historian. He's written a number of books about histories of different nations. You ever heard of this book, The Gifts of the Jews? Who's heard of this book? It's a well-known book. Okay? It was a history book. Thomas Cahill, he also wrote a book about Ireland. He's written a number of history books. Thomas Cahill wrote a book, he's not Jewish, he wrote a book called The Gifts of the Jews. I want to read you from a book review of it, just because it's not Cahill making this case, but someone talking about the book. These are excerpts from the book review. Thomas Cahill writes in his book, "We can hardly get up in the morning or cross the street without being Jewish." He's talking about being a Westerner. In this new volume, Cahill's unwavering thesis is that the religion of the Hebrews, a tiny marginal desert tribe, changed the worldview of Western civilization. According to Cahill, the West's most deeply held beliefs about life, human nature, God, and justice are all owed to the ancient Israelites. Cahill begins his account before the Hebrews entered history, when humankind was glued to the old primordial ways of believing. For early humans, life moved in cycles, the moon and the tides, the seasons and farming and life itself. The never-changing pattern of birth, life, and death continued, generation upon generation. In some sense, the idea of time as we understand it did not exist. In this world of the ever-turning wheel, the countless gods and goddesses of the old mythologies played out their dramas in the world above. These gods, the pagan gods, were lustful, jealous, and greedy, and humans were of little import. Remember what Dean Eichler spoke about earlier in the year. Man had no freedom to choose a destiny, and no divinely inspired laws and ethics to guide him. To borrow a phrase from Hobbes' characterization of life in a state of nature, early man's mythical life was nasty, brutish, and short. According to Cahill, the Hebrews developed a whole new way of experiencing reality. He writes, "It may be said with some justice that theirs is the only new idea that human beings ever had. The Hebrew God was radically different from the families of gods ruling the pagan religions. Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, Hashem, was the only God," he writes it out in English, "was the only God that counts. Not one of the many who could be played off against each other. He was also the opposite of the Sumerian gods with their patently human motivations of greed and lust. He had unknowable goals for the world. The universe God created was also very different from the world imagined by old religions. Time did not meander in an eternal circle, but it had a beginning and an end. Man was not fated to play an inconsequential role in the universe, but was a character in an unfolding story." Cahill writes that for the first time, the real time and place was not the heavenly and archetypal, but the here and now. Cahill's overall argument is uncontroversial and accepted. It is generally acknowledged that monotheism and the Jewish concept of time were radical and original, as was Judaism's ethical system. There's an excerpt from a book review that captures the essence of something that is essentially agreed upon. Everyone knows that Western morality today is, if it took many, many centuries to get here, a development of a Jewish morality. is brought into the world. That's what it is.
Why are you proud of it? Why does anyone be proud of it?
Because it's a huge step forward to where the world's morality was a few centuries ago. We're not done yet. The story isn't over yet. The world is a much more moral and ethical place today than it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago.
But you were just bashing Western civilization.
I was not bashing Western civilization.
Saying how, it takes away everybody's culture. That it's just everybody assimilates into one.
I don't think that's bad. I think there's nothing wrong with Western civilization eliminating all the cultures except ours. We have to be separate. We have to be separate.
But it is.
It is. And what's it spreading? What is Western culture spreading in the world? It's spreading a lot of nonsense along with it, but it's also spreading understandings of freedom, understandings of certain values of what's good and what's evil in the world.
Sanctity of life.
Sanctity of life. These are things that were just not taken for granted in many parts of the world, even up to a generation or two ago. The way the world has progressed morally, if you look at, there are practices by governments that used to be viewed as acceptable and now are viewed as horribly immoral. The world is progressing morally. And that, in a very subtle way, has to do, and is acknowledged. There's this book, there's another book, there's a book that just came out, written by George Gilder, who's a thinker who generally writes about economy and technology. He's a great economist. He wrote a classic of economy called Wealth and Poverty, which was the basis for the American government's economic policies in the 1980s. He's a great thinker, lives out in the Pacific Northwest. Like every great thinker, he's controversial. Some people hate him, some people love him. He's written for the last decade or two. He's been writing mostly about technology. He just wrote a book called The Israel Test. If you look online, you'll see lots of reviews of it. It's a very controversial book right now. He wrote a book called The Israel Test. You have this book? You have Gilder's book?
Yeah, if anybody wants to.
Oh, cool. I want to borrow it. So the Israel Test, in the Israel Test, this guy Gilder, he's not Jewish. George Gilder basically says, the fundamental question that's facing the world today, for every person and for every nation, is whether you support Israel or don't support Israel. Because the values, economically, security, and certain moral beliefs, the values that Western society in a good way is built on, are essentially the values of the Jews. And those people who are opposed to those values are the people who are anti-Israel today. And that's what the real struggles are all about. It's a non-Jewish person, right? And he's, of course, because he's not Jewish, he's free to say things that if a Jew wrote them, he'd be viewed as some sort of elitist racist. But it's a very interesting book. I read some reviews of it. I'd like to read the book. But just to understand, we could take Cahill and Gilder and put them on the side and just think for a second. When you're out there in the world, I'm not saying when you're out there, you're a Chabadnik, you're out there trying to influence everyone all the time. It's just, this is a very hard thing for us to accept. But we didn't choose to be part of the Melech HaKohanim. We didn't choose it. We were born into it. Hashem held a mountain over our heads. Said, this is your job. That's another big test that we have. And this is a test, like the other test I said that is unwinnable. This one is even more unwinnable. You know what's unwinnable? Western society has taught us all that our life is about choices we make. That we're free to choose everything. And we're not. Frankly, there's a lot of stuff you didn't choose. You didn't choose what time period to be born in, you didn't choose what country to be born in, you didn't choose what gender to be, you didn't choose a lot of things about yourself you didn't choose. But they're not affronts to your autonomy. And this is another thing you didn't choose. You didn't choose to be part of this mission, to be part of this purpose. And it's a big purpose. The purpose is to elevate the rest of the world and to affect the rest of the world in your own minuscule, unmeasurable way. By the time you're like a point in that very big picture, no one's ever going to be able to say, unless you're one of the greats, and some of you might be great leaders one day, but for a lot of us, we're just going to be a little dot in that big picture of God's perfect world, where someone's going to say, did that contribution really matter? Of course it did. Take away your contribution to the elevating of the world, it will make a difference. In the same way that one mitzvah makes a difference. Not in a way that I can explain to you. I can't explain to you how you, remaining a good, strong Orthodox Jew, raising a nice family, and being an accountant and having a job and taking your kids to school and to soccer practice, whatever, is gonna help perfect the world. I can't explain it to you in a kind of logical way that I could explain to you, why, how, Gandhi made the world a better place. I can't explain it to you, but I also can't explain to you why not eating a lobster makes you a better person. It's part of our system. So when we go out there in the world, what's our approach? Go out there in the world, we have to understand we're different. We're different in the way that a soldier is different from a civilian. It's not being better. Why do we have to love other Jews? Why are we obligated to love other Jews? Why are we obligated to love everyone? So first of all, loving everyone is a meaningless concept. If you were obligated to love everyone, that would basically mean you don't love anybody. It's impossible. Love is an emotion that distinguishes some people from other people. You can't say, I love all human beings. Imagine if I said to my wife, I love you, and I love everyone. You see that guy on the street? I love him too. I love you, and I love him. What am I saying to my wife? That's the biggest insult in the world. There's no such thing as loving everybody. So what does it mean you're supposed to love every Jew? Because Jews are special? No. If there's a military unit, if there's a group of commandos going into battle to do some mission for Israel, we all need those soldiers to really care about each other and be watching each other's backs and be willing to give their lives for each other. We need them to be able to behave that way under pressure. We need that. Because being a Jew in the world is not easy. Being a Jew in the world is full of challenges. In different time periods there's different challenges. And the closeness that Jews feel for each other has two effects. Number one, it helps us get through. And that's part of God's plan. We need to be able to get through and survive. And number two, it helps enhance that special moral society. Part of what makes your average Jew, who's not like this great, philosophical moral thinker, be part of a society that's more moral and more caring, is the fact that the cab driver in Beit Shemesh looks at you and goes, "Oh, you're a Jew," and he loves you. Why does he love you? Because you're Jewish. Because he was raised that way. But having a whole nation of people who feel special about each other increases the moral quality of the way the society functions. So in the creation of the Mamlechet Kohanim, it happens to be necessary to command them to treat each other specially. So if we go back to the mother at the door in the blizzard example, yes, it's true you have to treat her differently. But you know what the irony is? Treating her differently has got nothing to do with her. It's got to do ultimately with the effect that you have on the whole world. It's what Rav Kook says in that line, and with this I'll close. Again, Ota ha'itpardut mikol ha'amim hi atzma ha'itachdut ha'yoter atzuma laho'il l'chol ha'adam asher al pnei adama. That very separation from all the nations is itself the most powerful connection for the purpose of all people on the face of the earth. That's what we're here for. It's not easy. It's full of challenges. That's our job in the world.